Hi, everyone, and congratulations on finishing week number 2 of ET 501 and getting through a lot of reading material on moral vision of the New Testament. I'll talk about that in a moment, but I want to give you a couple of points on how to have a successful week number 3 here. This week, there are 3 short articles. Some of you have already began to record in your journal entry for this week. You're reading Emily Towns, Marcia Riggs, and Miguel de la Torre on doing ethics from the margins. And so we talked about a little bit why we're doing that this week. It kind of fits into our 4 different paradigms. The topical, the narrative, the passage centric with Sermon on the Mount, and then doing ethics from the margins. And so you'll be reading those. They're shorter, less than 100 pages for sure. And if you want to catch up from readings from the last couple weeks, that's totally fine. If you want to read in advance in anticipation of your precis, that's fine as well. So that's what you'll be doing this week. You'll have a quiz and you'll have some reading reflections on those articles. The second thing is I posted a sample precis of Moral Vision of the New Testament that I wrote just to show you an example of how I would write a precis. And so it comes on the heels of your reading at least part of Moral Vision. And so you can download that, check that out, read that for yourself, use it as a model for your week number 4 when you're writing your precis. This week I'm going to have an office hour on Wednesday at 6 p.m. That's 6 p.m. Pacific time. I know that doesn't work for everybody. This is a totally voluntary office hour, but it's also nice to see people in person. And so we're going to do it. And if you have questions about your precis or any other questions in the class, you feel free to pop in. You don't have to stay for the whole hour, but you can pop in, say hi, ask questions, or just even eavesdrop on other people's questions. And then fourth, for week number 4, you're going to be writing a precis on one of your parallel track readings. The 5 readings are Earth Community and Earth Ethics by Larry Rasmussen. That's on ecological ethics. The second is on Sex, Gender, and Christian Ethics by Lisa Cahill. The title is pretty obvious what the topic is. The third is Strength to Love by Martin Luther King Jr. That's a collection of his sermons. Focus on racial justice and a few other things, but mostly the focus is on racial justice. The fourth one is To Change the World, and that's more on politics, written by James Davidson Hunter. And then finally, the 5th one is Bonhoeffer's Black Jesus, written by my friend Reggie Williams, and that's on Bonhoeffer's experience in New York City and his experience in Abyssinian Baptist Church and how that changed him. Not just Abyssinian Baptist Church, but also the Harlem Renaissance and how that changed him as he went back to Germany as a pastor and a professor. So choose one of those books, order it or download it, however you want to do it. A few of them are available online, and so in the Fuller Library. So choose one of those books, and if you want to do some advanced reading, feel free to do some advanced reading this week. Okay. I just finished reading your reflections on Weapons of the Spirit, which you all noticed that the moral norm that is highlighted in that film is a particular immediate judgment. A particular and immediate judgment is formed by your community. Sometimes it's your family. Initially, it's your family. Then it's the broader community that you're a part of. Sometimes it's models, either that you see personally or that you read about that you want to emulate. Particular immediate judgments are the snap judgments that you make of the rightness or wrongness, or if you want to say it, the honor or shame that comes along with a moral decision. You may have reasons for that, like I said in the lecture, but you're not accessing those reasons. You're just making a snap judgment. And so what you saw in the film is these villagers, when Pierre went back to talk to them, said, that's a silly story. That's a silly question. Of course we would do that. Things like that. And what they're saying is, why are you asking me about this? This is the right thing to do. I made an immediate judgment about that. the questions that you're asking about what would I do in that situation are really important. The second question, as you lead, either as an official leader, as a lay person that has a seminary education in your community of faith, the second question that's important is, how do we form people morally so that they make decisions like this, that stand the test of time and that fit seamlessly into a Christian ethic, that we look back on and say, yes, that's who we want to be and that's how we want to act. And so how are we doing this? Does our church have a moral formation program? What is it doing? What stories is our church telling about how we are formed morally? Is it being intentional or unintentional about these things? So these are important questions, I think, that we can ask about this. The other thing that I want to say is just 3 really interesting quotes, or 3 points that come out in the movie that aren't necessarily related to moral norms. And the first one is this quote of the conspiracy of goodness. This reflects 1 Peter chapter 2 and 3, when Peter is telling these churches that are under persecution and pressure to conform to the Roman society how to stay steadfast in their faith. And he says, no matter what kind of pressure, no matter what kind of suffering you're experiencing, you're not supposed to get defensive. You're supposed to be ready to give a defense for the hope that's within you, but you're not supposed to be defensive. You're actually supposed to be doing good for all, because who can argue with good? And so I love that quote in there, that this was a conspiracy of goodness. The second quote that I love is that these pastors, Edward Thies and Andre Trocme, were a minority of 2. That is, they stood against violence when the Nazis were coming in and attacking France, and they stood against compromising and cooperating with the Nazis when they overtook France. And so they always were swimming upstream on the cultural thought. And this made them stand out. And sometimes we need to have the courage to stand out, even though the cultural stream might be drifting one direction or another. And then the third thing that I always want to point out in this film is that there are no small callings. These 2 men, Trocme and Edward Thies, were cosmopolitan pastors in the city. Because of their pacifist views, they were moved to, quote unquote, this backwater parish in Les Chambon. But what happened from that point forward, we're still reading about, we're still talking about, we're watching films about them, because their ethics stood the test of time. Not necessarily their pacifism or their nonviolence, I'm not saying that, but their consistency of who they were and how that helped to form the village in Les Chambon to participate in the rescue of Jews was important. And so there are no small callings. The goal for our life and our calling, no matter where we're at, if you're a lay person or a senior pastor, is to be faithful to what God has given to you in this moment. This is especially important in our kind of celebrity culture in Christianity right now, where we just prop up and highlight these really great communicators and orators, but it's kind of collapsing all around us. And we need to recover the idea that it's our goal to be faithful to God and to be faithful to the people that He's called us to. Okay, so that's enough about weapons of the Spirit. The third thing that I want to say is just to remind you where moral vision of the New Testament fits into our class. This is an example of narrative ethics, right? We're reading these letters in the New Testament to different audiences, different occasions, answering different questions. And what Hayes is saying is that as you do this, if you're going to develop a Christian ethic, you have to look at the themes that consistently emerge through all of them. And so what he says is there are 3 themes that emerge: the cross, the community, and the new creation. That is the eschatological vision of the new creation, the ecclesiological vision of the community of faith, and then the cross. And you can see, like, every time the New Testament writers talk about humility, which is a Christian virtue, moral virtue, they usually use the example of the cross, that the God of the universe would step into his creation and submit himself to the violence that sin has caused in order to redeem the people and the world back to himself. And so this is an example of how the cross is used. Notice again, so we've seen the Sermon on the Mount, and we've seen now narrative ethics with that Hayes has talked about. In kingdom ethics, Stassen and Gushee have added a chapter on love and justice because these are important concepts in the Christian ethic, and the Sermon on the Mount doesn't quite get to them in the way that they want to. They want it to, and so they're going to add a couple of chapters on that. And then Hayes talks about why love isn't a focal image in the New Testament. I don't think he's right about that, but what he says is not in every letter, and so it's not one of the focal images. But notice how he has to go out of his way to talk about that. Maybe because, as First John says, God is love. That's part of his ontological nature. Maybe it's just assumed that this might be a focal image. But we're reading the 3 articles on ethics from the margins, because when you talk about liberative Christian ethics, you're going to talk about love and you're going to talk about justice. And so that's why we're kind of bringing a few different models together, because on their own they're not quite complete and they're not quite whole, but when we bring them together, they complement one another in such a way that we can develop a robust, a very thick and rich tradition of Christian ethics. And so that's how moral vision in the New Testament fits in to our coursework, and this is how ethics from the margins fits in. So I hope you have and enjoy a little more relaxed reading in week number 3. Thanks for all the hard work that you're doing so far in the course. I think you all are doing great, and it's perfect the way that you're interacting with one another in your journal reflections. And then don't forget that if you want to pop in on Wednesday, I think I said at 6 p.m. Pacific time for office hour, I'll be sending out a Zoom invitation for that, and then you can pop in if you'd like. There's no obligation. It's totally voluntary, but please feel free. I love to see people's faces and get to know you personally, as personal as Zoom can be. And then if you have questions, I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Okay, have a great week.